Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to Surviving an SLO Technology Transition session. My name is Becky and I am the moderator for this session. Before I introduce our presenters, I have a few items to share with you. Please note we are in that you have both video and audio and microphone capability. We ask that you keep your microphone muted unless you are interacting in some way. Please take your cues from the presenter or from me so that we can create a productive environment for everyone. Should you have any questions or comments, please enter them into the chat box. As time allows, we will share your questions with the presenter. Additionally, you may use the chat feature to share thoughts with the presenters and or each other. You also have the ability to post reactions like a thumbs up on your video. Please feel free to use these as appropriate. And thank you again for joining the session. We have 4 presenters, so I will leave it up to them to introduce themselves.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Nili Kirscher. I'm the curriculum chair or curriculum co-chair at Woodland Community College, and I'm serving on the ASCCC Accreditation Committee this year. And I will let my co-presenters introduce themselves in a moment, but we just wanted to say a little bit about why we're doing this presentation. I actually, our accreditation committee was asked for ideas for this symposium, and I am personally going through an SLO technology transition. So I had asked if they could do a session on it, and now here we are with the privilege of helping facilitate that session. So we're going to have folks with different levels of experience of surviving the transition or trying to survive. I'm in the still trying to survive mode. So my college is in the first semester of implementing eLumen for curriculum and SLOs after 2 years of planning. And so we've got other panelists with different levels of experience that will have more to share. So I'll let them go next. Cheryl, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Sure. My name is Cheryl Aschenbach. I am a secretary for the Academic Senate, California Community Colleges, but I'm also a faculty member at Lassen College, past curriculum chair and Senate co-chair, and was part of a project to move to a technology transition for our SLO gathering and reporting years ago. And then we transitioned off of that. And so we actually still use a paper and form based process. So I'm always interested in the conversation around technology to see what the possibilities are and to anticipate the headaches perhaps, so we can head them off in advance for the point where my college decides to re-adopt a technology transition or technology for SLOs. Sheri?
All right, and I'm Sheri Berger. I am the Vice President of Academic Affairs at Compton College. I am the CIO representative to the ASCCC Accreditation Committee, and I've been a Vice President for almost 7 years now. I was at Los Angeles Pierce College first, so when I was a faculty member, I was a curriculum chair, an SLO chair, coordinator. So I've had all those many hats in all my different roles, and I've been through 2 transitions of SLO technology, both to eLumen at 2 different institutions. And we're starting it at Compton, so that's one of them. And we'll pass it off to Claudia.
Hi, good morning. My name is Claudia de la Toba. I'm currently teaching at Southwestern College, and I'm in the Accreditation Committee. I've been in several committees in the past at the state level too, and the basic skills. My college has been using eLumen for over 10 years since I started teaching there. So now with the transition with, going into remote and gathering data, we are tweaking a little bit, kind of putting more information into SLOs through eLumen. It's been a challenge because, communicating with a lot of the departments, but we're always constant learning, and we have become a little bit, we can say, experts in that, but it's a challenge sometimes. So I will bring some information that I have, but I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
And if I could jump in real quick, I didn't name my technology, but we used Weave Online briefly, and I thought it worked pretty well for what we needed. It just others decided otherwise. But as you can hear from Nili and Sheri and Claudia, they all have experience directly with eLumen, and we didn't want to make this, solely an eLumen presentation, because I think we're trying to approach some issues that are going to be experienced no matter what technology solution you're looking at. And so, certainly It'd be interesting in the chat to hear a couple different things. Where are you in terms of a technology transition? Have you adopted and are using? Are you considering adoption? Are you in the middle of that like Nili is? And then also, if you'd like to share with us what technology your college is using.
Are you doing the slides, Cheryl? Thank you. Okay. Actually, we've organized the presentation into sort of 3 different phases of the things to consider before and during and after a transition. You'll see that the slides are mostly structured around questions. We want to have a lot of discussion and input, not as many answers, but some of us will be sharing some of the things we've learned as we've been through this process. We also have a Google sheet, I guess. What is it? It's not sheets. It's a Google Doc that Cheryl's going to be posting the link in the chat so that we can kind of document some of the other suggestions, questions, answers, any input that you have, because it turns out there was some interest in this topic. So we'd like to document as much information from the field as we can. So you'll see that that Google Doc link popping up, and you can go in and put your comments there or in the chat. And we'll also have lots of time for discussion here in the Zoom. So with that, I'll give you Sheri to start before a transition.
Thank you, Nili. Next slide, please.
Cheryl.
Well, we can still go to the next slide. So the first thing, when you talk about transitioning to a system, whether or not you're using a paper or you're using some other technology and you want to transition to a different system, is to really have inclusive vetting. And so with all of my experiences, it's worked best when there's been a lot of individuals who have had a lot of input. So maybe there's a key committee on campus, like your SLO committee. That's worked really well. When I was at LA Pierce College, the Outcomes Committee is the one that made the recommendation up through the participatory governance system, and the Senate was involved as well to ensure that everybody was on board and really thought that there was a need to move forward. Also looking at doing vetting, include as many people as possible, has really worked well. Make sure there's ideas about what the challenges are that are currently having with the current system and what you hope to gain out of the new system. And consider enough vendors, right? So sometimes we hear from other colleges, oh, you should do this one, we're doing this one. But at the end of the day, when you bring in presentations and you have vendors come to present, you should really be looking probably at least 3 vendors. And then the other thing I think sometimes gets lost, because I know it hasn't really happened at some of our institutions that I've been at, is those institutions that have implemented these systems and have used them for a while to find out if they're really doing what they're doing. Because remember, a lot of times the companies come in and they demonstrate these great things that the system does. And then when you get it, it somehow doesn't do all those things because those were the best whistles. And so you end up getting a demonstration about, a nice ice cream sundae with sprinkles and cherries, and you end up buying vanilla. So you want to make sure that you talk to people that have already gone through that experience. Next slide, please. Yeah. And an important thing to do before you start this transition conversation is to think about your data continuity, especially if you have a current system. So right now at Compton College, we're moving from TrackDat, which is now Nuventive, to Illumin. And so a big conversation that we're having now, because we didn't talk about this in advance, is what do we do with all the data from Nuventive and what do we want to move over? So that's a lesson learned. When I was at LA Pierce College, we were on paper, so there wasn't a lot of data continuity to be had there. So make sure that the people that need to be involved, and I think oftentimes we forget our institutional research offices, but while they're not the ones doing the assessment, a lot of times when we implement this type of system, the maintenance of the system and the role for interpreting data later on, we're going to talk about, falls back to the institutional research office. And so they're oftentimes the ones that are dealing with this data continuity. And so bring them into the conversation early. And last, oh, that's okay. I was good. Next slide. Getting buy-in. Getting buy-in is really important. So some of that happens through that vetting and involving all those different constituents on campus, because that way they're going to be more on board once the implementation starts, because it will be a bumpy road. No implementation that I've ever experienced has gone smoothly. And so the faculty staff, what stage do we bring them in? At the very beginning. They were involved in those demonstrations. We had set up like a voting system at LA Pierce College where they voted and took notes. It was like a real thing. So it wasn't just like a presentation like we were watching a movie. Like afterwards, people were asked a lot of questions for input. And so those conversations should come up early. And I want to open it up. I see there's a lot of things going on in the chat. But if anybody wants to share, if you've already or recently gone through this transition, what worked and what did you wish you had done before a transition to do all of these things, to get the buy-in, to have these conversations. So I want to hear from the rest of the people in the group. We want this to be a very interactive session. So let me look at the chat.
Yeah, and please feel free to insert into the chat, into the Google Doc, or even, in these moments of break, raise your hand or speak up. We'd love to hear some of your inputs. I did see in the chat, there's a couple others of you who are at different points in progress, experiencing the transitions from Tracked Out and Nuventive to Illumin. So, similar perhaps experiences with Sheri, but, what perhaps if you're further along, what should have been discussed earlier in the process rather than in the middle of?
Well, okay, so I see in the chat, Brian at Los Madranos says that they're transitioning from a homegrown system to Illumin. And they're moving into a pilot. And at Moore Park, they've just switched last summer from Nuventive to Illumin. Oh, I wish I would have known that last summer. And at Foothill, they've got Tracked Out, and they're trying to consider if that will continue to serve their needs. So this is very timely for Foothill, this conversation. Does anybody want to share anything else? This is very helpful because we're all in it together. We need to learn from each other. All right, if not, I'm going to turn it back over to Nili to get us into, here, experience at Imperial Valley. It takes a champion to guide the implementation of a new tool. Excellent point. Thank you, Jose. We all have different systems, have same problems, and but I like the idea of a champion, somebody who's going to make sure that really rally the troops and cheerlead on the side and really take the lead to keep, to herd the cats and keep them all together. That's an excellent point. Thank you for raising that.
And if we could, since Rachel's a little bit ahead of you, perhaps, Sheri, on the switch from Nuventive to Illumin, Rachel, specifically giving you a chance, is there anything as that transition happened last summer, lessons learned that, hey, we should have done something about data continuity planning in advance, or getting buy-in, or even just the vetting with more folks? Any comments on that?
Sure. The vetting was pretty good. We had presentations from several vendors, and it went through the SLO committee, voted on it, and then I think even the academic senate voted on it. So a lot of buy-in from it. The situation with what it looks like on the ground was some faculty were expecting a magic button so that they could just move their grades in Canvas through to Illumin and they wouldn't have to think about it at all. And that's not really how it works. You still have to go through and grade each student. So that was a little bit of a miscommunication from what faculty thought that they were getting versus what it actually looked like. But the discussion on that has been fine. Right now, it just took more time to roll it out than we expected. And by the time we were ready for faculty to play with it in the summer, everyone was off contract. So that slowed us down quite a bit. It revealed a lot of inconsistencies in our outcomes language between TrackDat and what was listed in. We had an issue with curriculum, the service with curriculum, because that had just gone through a software change as well. And that change revealed some additional outcome sentences that faculty weren't aware of. So there was an overall college concern about, well, what are the outcomes that we're actually doing? So everyone, not all of the departments are at the same stage at this point. So we're just working with the departments to help them efficiently get on board without overwhelming them. So some departments are taking this semester to have a look over their language, and then some are already ready to go, have their assessments done, track, but it's a lot of herding cats, and we're just trying to remain open with the faculty needs and not overwhelm them, but also make sure we're getting compliance with everyone. A big question for us this spring, for faculty this spring, was how can I efficiently assess? And so I just did a little presentation on some ideas that I crowdsourced from faculty on efficient assessment methods that would work within eLumen. And it seems like that helped faculty to see that, oh, I'm already doing this all of the time, and I just need to have it look a certain way. And that got everyone on board. So just making sure we're a cheerleader for everyone, and that we're on their side was a big deal for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rachel. I like the point about managing expectations, and Grace mentioned it as well in the chat. And I think that's one of the reasons why I added in, we never talked to other people at other colleges using other systems or using the systems we were considering. And so I think that's one of the reasons why when you're considering, you should really talk to people who've used the system and gone through all of this to get those pitfalls. And I really like that. Thank you very much for sharing. All right, I'll pass it off to Nili to talk about during the transition.
Okay, thank you. As I said, I'm in the thick of it. Cheryl, we can go to the next slide. Okay, well, one of the things that occurred to me as Rachel was talking about not only the managing expectations that Grace brought up, but the timeline, that to me, that was the killer, right? I thought I'm in an interesting situation where I am pretty much the faculty cat herder on my campus at this point. But when we initially made the decision 2 years ago, like pre-COVID, right? We vetted it really well, I thought. We looked at multiple vendors. We had a very robust rubric. We had people from all different constituencies ranking them. We brought them in for in-depth grillings and presentations. We talked to other colleges, and so much time went by that the product changed. So the people we had talked to at other colleges that were using it, what we got was a different iteration. Some of the things may be better, but they're still in beta. So that like click of a button for Canvas, right? It's still being promised, but it's in beta. So for us, that the timeline, before getting a reasonable expectation of the timeline, but also during, keeping up to date on all the changes, right? So that was an interesting thing. We don't have that in any of the slides, but managing the timeline expectations, and if it's a long period of time, how do you keep buy-in? One of the things that came up for us at my district is the idea of roles and oversight, because we also moved from TrackDat or Nuventive to eLumen, and it was just in our old system, the way we had it configured, everybody could just do whatever they wanted. There was no oversight. Faculty kind of directly interfaced, and they could use and we were batch uploading. We were doing aggregated like end results, what percentage of students met. And so moving to eLumen gives us so many more tools that when faculty heard it initially, when we got the buy-in and they're seeing these cool charts and things we can do and push of a button from Canvas, we had the buy-in. And then when it came down to it, the roles and oversight were really tricky, because now that we've got this tool that we didn't really maybe understand everything it could do, we have the question, as we have with curriculum, does technology drive procedural changes at the college? You know, the way we have typically done things can't be done with the new system. And so that was something I wish we had mapped out a lot more before, but since we haven't, we're doing it during. One thing that came up, and it sounds like Claudia may have experience with this too, is that when the vendor terminology, whatever program it is, they make choices in how they configure their site that actually can cause consternation. And, you know, one example in our current system is they use the term faculty for just a standard employee account. They use the term coordinators, which at my college is like, you get paid extra. It's an MOU. It's a collective bargaining agreement thing. So they're just titles, right? They're just titles that eLumen uses, and we can work around it. But if we had realized that sooner, that we couldn't configure, what can you configure? What can you not? Sending notifications, and just this week, faculty got notifications that say, you must go in and do this. You are required to review. And that's not actually true, but we can't configure the wording of the notification. So those are all things that I think are not deal breakers. If the technology is good and it gives you good options, you know, you can work around it, but that needed to be part of the buy-in. Maybe we couldn't have known that at the beginning, but I'm feeling now very guilty that we didn't, you know, kind of discover these things quicker and start preparing faculty sooner, you know, over the course of 2 years, for the idea, like, just be cool, man. It's a label. We're not really changing your job. It's just how the system labels it. And we've also been putting, honestly, some pressure on the vendor to give us some more configurations if they want the California community colleges to use it. So those kinds of questions about what do you do when the tool doesn't match what you normally do, and how do you kind of scaffold in who gets to see the data and own the data when it has much more granular oversight. Can we go to the next slide, Cheryl? We're going to open it up in a minute to discuss all of these, you know, for all of you. But one of the things that Sheri had shared and that we've been trying to do at my college, my district, is really being cognizant of doing a scaffolded approach. I mean, I kind of called it baby steps, but I guess that term isn't always, it can seem a little bit diminutive, but we were using a scaffolded approach where we've gone to this like way more intense technology that can do a lot more than what we did in our old system, but we're not implementing all the features right away. So we're starting with this first semester, just can you get into the system? Can you log in, find your classes? And we're allowing people to do that kind of collective data upload that they're used to, and not make them go through student by student yet. And then the next semester, okay, now we're going to do student by student, and we're working on all of that. So we're trying to configure it as similarly as possible to sort of ease the transition, but communicating all the way that the expectation is we're going to use more of these. So we're curious to hear what other people's experiences are, or best practices, and sort of the scaffolded approach. I know Sheri has some ideas about, you know, if you're moving to a system with standardized rubrics, can you start with the real simple passed, didn't pass, you know, kind of rubric, and then at what pace, what are the best practices for implementing those advanced features? I don't have the answer yet because I'm still working on it. Maybe next year I'll know more, but I sure know about some of the pitfalls. So why don't we open it? I haven't been able to monitor the chat while I was talking, but maybe Cheryl or anybody else, if you saw anything.
Let me jump in, Nili, for a little bit, because you did talk a little bit about what I shared with the group as we were preparing for this. When I was at LA Pierce College, that has now been using the system for about 4 or 5 years, you know, we saw these great ways that you can incorporate rubrics into eLumen, and you know, you can have these very elaborate type rubrics, which is made part of the buy-in from the faculty because they were using these elaborate rubrics on paper. But you know, you realize that kind of complexity, and then how you go about entering that data in at the student level, becomes much more cumbersome in the system than it does on paper. And then we're starting to lose buy-in. So the SLO coordinator, the faculty SLO coordinator at the time, her name is Monique, she was not a techie person. So this was really interesting in the transition because she was learning the technology as she went along. So it had to make sense to her. And in some respects, that was really helpful because she was, she wasn't above it all, right? She was like in it trying to figure out how are we going to get our adjuncts to do this? How are we going to get the people who don't like to even check their email to do this? And they decided at Pierce College when they implemented it, everybody would have access. They didn't do a SCAF, they didn't do like a pilot. They just said everybody's going to enter this at every class, every student, but we're just going to do, and what she called, and I give her credit, the easy button. It was a yes, no. Did the student meet the outcome or not meet the outcome? So it was pretty much yes, no, all the way around. And because that was like, you click yes or no for the outcome and for each student, and it's set up was nicely in the system, it wasn't that cumbersome. And faculty started doing it when they did their grades at the end of the term. They were talking about integrating Canvas 4 years ago, so it's still on their beta. So it's just, that's the approach she took, the easy button. I don't know if you all remember the Staples commercial, but they had the easy button commercial then. And so that's what she went around and talked about. We're going to just have the easy button. And that helped a lot in this during transition period. At least that was the experience at that college. And now I see some things coming up in the chat. So I'll turn it back over to Cheryl to sort of moderate us and help recenter us back here.
Oops, Cheryl went away for a sec. You there? Okay.
Okay, so I'm looking
Sorry,
here.
I'm back. Sorry, I couldn't get my unmute button. So I think there's a couple questions that have popped up in the chat or comments that tie in, Sheri, with what you were just saying and what Nili's talked about as well. There's quite a bit specifically about rubrics. Grace, who also spoke of kind of the buyer's remorse that faculty experience with their system and their curriculum meta. But I think that's, certainly I've heard that in many cases, because as Sheri pointed out earlier, we, are sold or have this picture in our minds of this amazing system we're going to have. And then when it's not like that in the very beginning, it can be really frustrating. And there's that, little bit of remorse, or you hear, after the fact that another system has advanced and it, different features than perhaps you had demonstrated originally. And so it's a challenge then to keep folks interested and be that champion or that cheerleader. But rubrics has popped up and some questions about how rubrics work between Ellumin and Canvas and whether there's plans to integrate. And Nili, you commented that they're in beta testing right now. Jennifer also commented on that. Mid-February for integration is one comment Brianna added. Any other thoughts on that? It might not seem quite so intimidating to have to use just the yes, no, easy button if in fact we can use our Canvas rubrics and actually have them in some way imported. So I think we're all hopeful for that. But any other thoughts or comments on that rubric piece?
I cannot add anything because I've not used it at that level as a faculty member. But maybe there are some people here who know a little bit more, who've already maybe transitioned to Ellumin.
Yeah, if anyone wants to jump in.
I mean, I do know a little more about how they're proposing for the rubrics to work, but it's very specific to Ellumin. I don't know if we want to go down that rabbit hole here, but I will say the big discussion point right now is that you have individual faculty who can create their own rubric and enter stuff directly in. No Canvas integration yet, but they can enter directly in. Then you also have the course coordinator position, which Ellumin had envisioned as deans, but we use it in the curriculum process as like faculty, full-time. We don't have department chairs, small college. So it's the other issue that we're having is kind of linking the levels of permissions and oversight between the curriculum module, because we transitioned from Curricunet to Ellumin for curriculum, from TrackDat for program review and SLO. So we're kind of trying to combine all of it. But it's interesting because we have deans that can make a standardized rubric and give it to everybody to use. We have individual people can then just go in and make their own rubrics and use it. You have a lot of choices, but I think I think that scaffolded approach and like start with just giving people a standard one that they can use that's as similar to what they're used to as possible, and then letting them experiment has been sort of easing some of the concerns at our campus. We do have some concerns about how the Canvas integration will work because currently Canvas doesn't let you have multiple rubrics on an assignment. So those of us that are already using rubric to grade, we don't want to have to then go into, so, but it's still beta, so I don't want to say too much about that. You know,
oh, go ahead. I see you've raised your hand, Grace.
Grace has her hand raised. So Grace, why don't you unmute yourself and just jump in.
Yeah, hi everyone. So as I mentioned, we were in CurricuNet Meta, which we'd have some problems. And the way we're approaching outcomes is that we're not gonna go for Canvas integration, because I could see that creating a lot of issues. But you can actually, SLO coordinators can get the learning outcomes loaded into Canvas on an institution level, so that you're not relying on an integration. And that gives a lot of freedom to the faculty, because then they can align the outcomes on their own rubrics. So it's not that everyone has to use the same rubric. You can actually give a lot of freedom because the faculty can decide which learning outcomes are actually being met by certain rubrics. So that's the way we're doing it at Evergreen. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Really appreciate that input, because we haven't used it at the institutional level within Canvas like that. So good to know what's possible.
I didn't have anything more on that slide if we want to move to the next section, and then unless people want to have more discussion.
Yeah, we can pass on to Claudia, and then we can always come back, loop back at the end to all three portions.
Okay, so my section is after the transition. So what are we promoting? Data literacy. You have more data. What do you do with it? How do you ease your concerns without disaggregating data? What support and training is needed, especially if data is continue disrupting? Any technology or specific training and support, the outcomes assessment support and training, and data literacy training and support. So in our case, you know, I can kind of give a little example. What we're going through in my institution with the data is that we're at the point that since we moved from Blackboard into Canvas, we came up to the wall and to kind of how we're going to collect the data. So what we did in our institution, we incorporate the RI with the data. They're helping us to collect all that data, but we came up to a problem that transferring automatically, like Grace was saying, we're kind of like in that. You know, so what we're doing, we're just collecting the data from the institution and all the grades. And so what we're doing now because we're going through the changes of now we're going through remotely, we're concerned about how we're going to be assessing the students that they are not, you know, listed in the disaggregated data. So for us right now at this point, as we're, you know, going through a transition that with the guided pathways, we want to make sure that we include everyone, the students in that data. And we're in our institutions, the support that we're getting is that we have some open labs all the time, every week. Like if we need any help, like to collect the data and input it in Illumin, we have like tutors, you know, in each department. So a tutor or the coordinator and the tutor helped us, you know, and they pick up each school. And so that a point person is helping the teachers if they come into across with a problem. Now with the technology, we go through the training through of course, with the our regular PD, but right now that we were in remote, what happened in our school, we kind of hold on collating data and putting the inputs. So we're going to wait and see how all this year comes, you know, with the grades and things are going to change. And we're going to hold on and we're going to assess coming fall to put the new data into the system. Now, our training and support has actually improved. At the beginning, it was, was just supposed to look at a video and just put all the data, and it was very stressful for all us teachers because we couldn't do how we're going to assess. So what we did, every school in our college divided, and they analyzed the SLOs individually, and they chose 3. So each school has 3 sections, so that way they can collect the data and appropriate and put the input. There was use with Excel sheets, and then they incorporated into that. But right now we came up with Canvas because at Blackboard was much easier. Now we are kind of waiting and see how that integration is going to be. So basically we're doing it manually in our case. So that's what we're doing. And so I want to have some feedback from you. What are you doing in according with data? Are you still collecting it on your own? Are you working with the RA and directly, or how actually are you, doing that at your institutions? And next slide. Let's go. So, and for example, continuous improvement and cycle. How will you continue to implement new features? How do you close the feedback loop? How do you maintain the buy-in? So a good way is to practice, and if you make errors, that's okay, continue and get better at it. As an institution, in my example at Southwestern, we were, working harder every single time, and we still going through that cycle, and we're getting feedback from all, the departments and the teachers, and what are the things that can we do to make it better, and how do you maintain the buy-in? So as right now, as an institution, we're kind of like in a loophole here, because we're actually collecting all the data, and we're kind of transferring to Canvas. That's a new thing for a lot of personnel, and we're kind of deciding, okay, what are the things that we can do to make it better? So, we just came across that we're going to continue to, assist each other and put the data as much as we can and then from there, go on and circle and continue to make it better. And that's what we're doing in our institution right now. So for example, we're reassessing the SLOs. We're established them, the new ones, and each of the schools are assessing them, and then we're connected and analyze the data that we have so they can connect. So that way it goes into that loop and that circle, and then we evaluate them. And so that way we can close the loop and then start all over. That's what we did actually last semester before the pandemic. And we were analyzing, so each school was redoing their SLOs, and make it simple, like pick 3. So that way, because there were tons. And so that way we can, have a better understanding and collecting the data in our case. And next slide. Any questions?
Go ahead and hang out on this slide for a minute.
Yeah.
Thanks, Claudia. So it'd be interesting to hear what others have to say. What kind of support are you providing your faculty? I think Rachel left, but she'd mentioned that, she certainly played a role in helping folks. Claudia, you mentioned having the eLumen tutors. I love that idea, tutors for our faculty. Thinking through how many of our faculty still need to have conversations around really useful, authentic authentic assessment measures. And so to me, that feels like one of the conversations or places for professional development and support. And then of course, the technology piece, how do you get into it? I mean, Nili, you mentioned that the initial just how do you access it and how do you click yes or no, and being, happy when folks can do that much. So how, what are we doing to support folks in that way? And then 2, you're going to have new reports, you're going to have new collections of information, that data, are there conversations going on about how to interpret that data and how to have it inform the conversations that you're having around student learning on your campus and in your program reviews and other places? definitely would be interested in hearing input in those areas. Grace, weekly drop-in hours, so being available for that one-on-one assistance, so important for so many comfort levels, right? When you know you can actually talk to someone directly and not figure it out.
Also in what we're doing in our institution too, and I forgot to mention, we're actually, we are having groups like SLO points coordinators in ours, each school. And that person is in charge of going through the SOLs and the points that they need to be changed or how they can improve the quality. That's what we're doing at this point. And then from there, we're going to collect the data and see what happens this year. Of course, if eventually we'll go back face to face, so that way we can have that data included into that. That's what we're doing this year. I don't know anyone else.
Good, thanks, Claudia.
Similar or different?
Brianna's mentioning they also hold weekly drop-in hours to help with accomplishing the assignments as they go. And then having a pilot group practicing entering assignments, it helps to have folks with that experience. So then, they're ready when you actually roll it out and can support others in that effort. But yes, waiting for that Canvas integration, right? What else has worked, Nili, to try to get your faculty, ready for the checking the boxes and doing it, or Sheri, as you've worked from your perspective as an instructional officer, what has helped to get your faculty ready to go?
The big mistake I think that we made, and no disrespect to the vendor, but we allowed the vendor to lead the training sessions in our flex week this semester, even though I had assumed that I would be doing some of them, so that it actually caused a lot of consternation. I was like popping into the chat being like, well, when they say coordinator, so that I would say that doesn't work. I actually just made a Canvas shell that's linked to our professional development site. I'm more working on the curriculum part. So I'm a little nervous now that Claudia was sharing that faculty didn't like videos or manuals, so we've made like visual guides. We've made short how-to videos on stuff. And then we have the weekly like drop-in labs on Zoom where people can come in and work on curriculum or SLOs, and that seems to be helping a little bit. But I feel like it would have gone better if we hadn't had the vendor do a training that was like, it just wasn't targeted enough to where the faculty mindset was. There's nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't quite the right vibe that we probably should have gone for. So
that could be a challenge sometimes. They know their product so well, right? And then you have faculty who don't know it at all, and it's hard to find that space to get faculty to feel more comfortable with it. So having that local training could have empowered them more, made them feel a little bit more comfortable. Sheri, anything you want to add?
I was just going to say the other challenge is because the vendor knows it so well, the language that they use is very much specific to the program. And that's not how we speak on our campuses and the terminologies that we use. And so it is about having somebody being able to say, well, when it says coordinator in Illumin, it really just means this. And not using the term coordinator necessarily, but pointing it out because somebody's going to go in there later and go, what is the coordinator role? But when the vendor does it, they get very mired in their own language. And that's not the language that we typically speak on our campuses. I wanted to talk a little bit about the institutional learning outcomes, because I think that came up when Claudia was talking on the other slide. And one of the things, and I'm just going to throw that out there about cautions. I don't know how the other systems work, but I do know how Illumin works. Illumin can make it so that you map all of your course learning outcomes to your program learning outcomes, to your institutional learning outcomes, and how you link that is really critical as you're setting up. And I don't know how the other systems work, but when at Pierce College, we did this whole roll-up where the course linked to the program, and then we linked all the program learning outcomes to the institutional learning outcomes. So the first time that we went to assess our first institutional learning outcome and we pulled data, we had a lot of data in there. And we're like, wow, we've only like used this for 2 semesters. Why do we have so much data for this outcome? And what ended up happening is that you have classes that are common to multiple programs. So let's just take like an English 1A. It might be in the English degree, but it might be a program requirement in other degrees as well. And so that English 1A rolled up to the program, and then the programs rolled up to the outcomes. It was like, I don't even know like how many times counting the same student, more than quintuple. And I don't even know what the tuples are after quintuple. So it just kept counting. So and when I was at Pierce College, we had to take a step back and reconfigure how we were mapping to do our outcomes assessment at the program and institutional level. And what we ended up doing is we said, okay, we'll have a course mapped to a program, but then we'll just map our courses also to institutional levels as well. And then that was a whole reconfiguration and a bit of a hiccup or a bump in the road. And people are like, oh, we just did this and it's been only 2 years. But we really needed to do it because we had to clean up the data because we couldn't really, it wasn't valid to assess the institutional learning outcomes because people were being, counted 10, 20 times, depending on if they were full-time students and what classes they were in and what programs they were in and so forth. So I just throw that out as caution to the wind.
That's a great point. And I remember that process and as we were designing our system in Weave, trying to establish all those links and then having just even after a semester, the first trial of, the institutional level report with all the links, the massive amount of data, the pages that somebody tried to print to try to figure this out. And it was beyond anything that was useful, to be honest. And so, I probably first inquiring, how do those linkages work and how does the counting happen? And then trying to design accordingly. That's a good lesson to keep in mind. Jose asked a great question, and Nili, I think this goes back to, actually, Sheri, this I think goes back to your section. For those who have transitioned, what happens to your historical data, that data continuity? What kind of pieces of the conversation about, do you start from scratch or do you import or use some of that old data? What have your colleges decided to do and what kind of conversation was around that? Oh, I see, actually, Nili, you were in the chat. So your data, you guys decided to start from scratch because the data format was really different. And
for
that's
SLOs.
Surprising for SLOs.
Curriculum we had to migrate, right? So that took me literally 18 months of intense data cleanup for the district. It was really hard to migrate it, and the systems were pretty similar, and it was still that hard for slight differences. So when it came to the SLOs, I was like, I'm not doing this. So you want to hire someone else, but I'm not doing it. And they just said, we'll leave it. So that was lucky, sort of. It's still archived, though. We're not throwing it away. We're just not bringing it into the system.
And that looks like that may be kind of common practice. Grace mentioned they went from PDFs to CurricuNet and so save the PDFs. Brianna mentioning, folks manually entering the most recent data, but then storing, archiving the older stuff and keeping that available to folks.
Right. And I think what we're trying to do now at Compton is not carry the data over. We're going to obviously archive it, but not upload the data, but try to transfer what the outcomes are, so we don't have to manually go back and enter all of the outcomes. Oh. So, we're trying to parse it out. Those are the conversations we're right in the middle of.
And we actually diminished the SLOs to 3 each department because it was tons of data. We learned that was our problem, that everybody was like going back and forward with the institutional review and so on. So we desegregated. Each department now has 3 SLOs, and then from there, so teachers can focus on the main. And so we had to redo basically the whole curriculum. And that's in our school, that's what happened at Southwestern. But it was tough, and now we have to make it simple. We have to make sure what the focus, the most 3 important SLOs, so we can get that data and really get numbers. Because the same with us, like Sheri, it was huge. It was just horrible. And teachers just gave up and not doing their the Lumen, and they were stressed at the end of the semester, and everybody, oh, you have to turn them in, you have to turn them in. And everybody was worried about their finals and grades and finish up the semester. And then on top, with the transition into Illumin, that was another story. So what we did last semester, we paused, and due to the pandemic, so we're gonna see and compare. That's what we're going to do, and then pick it up when we go back.
So Claudia, when you say limiting to 3, is that limiting to measuring only 3 in a semester? Or is that only having 3 for a course or a program?
For a course, 3 to 4 for each course. So each department, each school, they're reassessing and they're picking 3 of them. So they said math, reading 158, English 115, and there, so that way they will focus on the 3 main, but they have to decide as a department, and they have to go through the, the current net and revise everything step by step. So we're almost done with that, but we still have work in our department, language and literature. But it's a work in progress, and the same, and all the departments are doing the same thing. So that way they can have a more real data collection.
That's interesting. Has there been pushback to that in some areas where they had more SLOs, or as Grace is pointing out, if they're somehow linking or aligning the SLOs with the objectives and feel like there needs to be more to be CID compliant? Are there any concerns about that, or faculty really in some areas? I can think of a couple of our disciplines that have, a half a dozen SLOs and then, pages of outcomes ultimately, or objectives within those. Has there been pushback, or are folks just, it's more about the effort to shrink to 3 and do the adjustments?
Yeah, 3 to 5, but still there is a concern because some professors, and I agree with you, because some professors are really concerned that we're not doing the measurement accordingly. So we said with 3 to 5, and like every semester they might change it. In my case, in the reading department in which I'm in, we kept 5. So each course has 5. Now, but the beauty of it that you have like, you can pick from those 5, you can pick 3, and then from there, that's what we're doing over there. So I don't know about you guys.
That makes sense. Part of that plan for assessing which ones do you measure when.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, this was a conversation when I was a faculty member and I was SLO coordinator that we had early on in the early 2000s about how many outcomes should a course have and how many outcomes should a program have. Because you could have a lot of course objectives. You could have 10, 12 course objectives within your course outline of record. So then what does that mean for your outcomes? And so the conversation we had back then in the day, almost 20 years ago, was, maybe we only need 2 or 3 really big picture umbrella type statements for the outcomes that all of these objectives fit into. And I do believe that at that college, they still maintain that for the most part. There are some programs, nursing in particular, is always one that has a lot more because they have some outside regulations. But for the most part, I think, 3 was about the average. Some had 2, some had 4. And it was really thinking about the SLOs as an umbrella statement that captures more than one objective. So maybe you're going to learn how to do a research paper and all that's entailed in that, which encompasses several objectives. So when it came to CID, the objectives are still there, but the outcomes sort of collapse some of the objectives into broader statements that then get assessed.
And the CID reviewers have to look at the objectives and outcomes kind of holistically when they review. So my college is this, and most classes have 3, 4 SLOs and quite a few more objectives because the objectives were already there. So the same thing Sheri was talking about, kind of looking at more overarching. That's worked pretty well for us. It hasn't jeopardized CID.
Yeah, that was the approach we took too. And it's not on our COR for some reason, but it kind of embedding the outcomes within the objectives within the outcomes to even visually start to show. We do that separately to show how our individual objectives support the attainment of the outcomes.
That's really interesting to me, Cheryl, because I was thinking like, how did I even get into all this mess? Like, how did I, as the curriculum chair, get pulled down this rabbit hole in my district? Why am I even here having this conversation? And it really stemmed back to an ACCJC finding for accreditation for us that they looked at our syllabi and the SLOs on it didn't match the ones on the COR. So because we have them on there, and it's because SLO assessment was done in TRACDAT, curriculum in Curricunet. So people would go into one system and change and then not upgrade it, and then they'd put one on, it was the right one in their mind. So that's the whole reason we went to this. And so back to that, like configuration question that Sheri had brought up, we had to decide when we moved to eLumen, are we going to make curriculum the heart of it? So we actually set it up that they can't change, alter, add outcomes in any instructional area without going through and doing the curriculum revision. So that it's, I mean, I've focused a lot on the things that we messed up on or maybe are learning from, but that has been, it's really set our mind at ease. I'm glad now though, we didn't pick that linear mapping that Sheri was talking about from courses to programs to, we did the V-shaped mapping, courses mapped to programs, courses mapped to ILOs, because now I'm like, oh, phew, I didn't even think about that. So we didn't even know to ask those questions. That's really useful information.
Great. And Kevin's noting that at El Camino College, they've actually changed their process. So when someone submits a request to change their SLO statement, that the coordinator also forwards that to the committee chair, so that they're, really, I would expect them probably working in tandem. And that's good. And that's worked for us. It goes through the curriculum process, but we're also a smaller college like you, Nili. And so, we can have items on the agenda to just revise SLOs, where others, maybe that's a subcommittee action or an SLO committee action that then, just passes through curriculum or is done with the permission of curriculum. Certainly at the bigger colleges with more curriculum, that would be a little bit harder to do. But so we have about 5 more minutes. I think it's a great time. And Nili, you started to broach on that, like things you would do as recommendations. We've talked a lot about considerations and things to think about, but based on some of your own experiences as users, as in some cases, the cheerleaders and the champions, or even the problem solvers, what are some of the suggestions you'd make to those, venturing into, or even in the middle of a technology transition for their SLOs? We've heard things like, you really don't think linear on the progression of the linkages, perhaps, use that V-shaped approach, use the easy button, use the yes or no rather than rubrics, perhaps to start with, provide support through things like tutoring, through drop-in availability. Nili, as well as someone else in the chat, mentioned, having just single page, support pages for folks to see the process, to try to help them through. Other suggestions, and again, open to everybody in addition to our presenters. Help us all survive this.
And Cheryl, I know you can't see the Google Doc, but I've been trying to monitor it. There's a couple of really good suggestions in there, but I noticed nobody put anything under after the transition. So I'm guessing a lot of us are in the thick of it right now.
Yep. That might be the case.
Yes, we have translate terms from the system to the college. Make yourself a document.
That's a good reference to have, right? That's a good
idea. Align the types of data. These are the challenges, but alignment of types of data and formats from old system to new. So if I had to change that into a recommendation, I would make sure that when you're engaging with the vendors that you're selecting, you talk to them about the systems you have and ask them how they have migrated data from that system previously. Put it up front in the before system, right? Don't do what happened, which is what I'm living through now, is we didn't talk about, oh, we've got our data in Uventive. How can we, move that over into eLumen? We never had that conversation until we needed to do it. Have that conversation up front when you're considering systems. And if you're in the middle of it, start having it now, I would say. That would be my recommendation.
That's a great recommendation.
And you really have to bring someone with like database knowledge, honestly. I mean, in my district, we don't actually have an institutional researcher. We kind of have a dean that oversees stuff, but we don't have anybody in that role. And it just so happens that I've helped migrate curriculum to 3 different systems and understand databases. But I'm a sociology professor, my knowledge was limited. So that yes, ask specifically like data in this form, in this platform. How do you get it? For our curriculum, to get it out of Curriculum, we had to hire a data scraper to get it off the front end of the website and pay someone else to get the data in a form that we could bring it into eLumen. And it still ended up being mostly manual. So those are the questions like I just didn't know what to ask. So find your like best, data nerd and get them in there to ask very, very specific questions.
That's a great point. And Sheri, you said it all along that, involving institutional research, and that's part of the reason, right? Nili, they often are those data folks and know how to scrape it and handle it and import it, where for most of us, that's really unfamiliar territory. It's like venturing into outer space. And if you don't have IR available or they don't have the capacity, who else perhaps can help with some of those efforts on your campus. That's critical. Other folks in IT perhaps, and they'll likely play a role, obviously, because you're talking about a technology solution, but to what degree? That's a great point. It's not just faculty and instruction that need to be engaged in the conversation, and that was suggested from the start. Other suggestions?
I'm going to throw one thing out here we really didn't touch on, but at a lot of colleges, I know that we talk about maybe doing service area outcomes in the non-instructional areas. And a lot of our vendors that we're talking about here for learning outcomes can do those as well. And I think if you're going to broaden the use of the system out to all constituents on campus and all units in all areas beyond the instructional area, ask questions about how they handle those, because it is very different than it is the way we think about it for instruction. So
that's a great point.
And don't be afraid to ask the vendors hard questions, because that's what they need to do. Like, they need to be able to answer those hard questions. And if they can't, that should be assigned to everyone.
Definitely. And then going back to, don't hesitate to reach out to other colleges who have done it or are undergoing even at the same time. And again, ask the vendors who those colleges are if you don't know firsthand, because they need to be able to connect folks so that, we certainly peer-to-peer can help each other through some of this, and our experiences can benefit others. Fantastic. Well, it's 12:30. And so I think we're out of time, but as chair of the Senate's Accreditation Committee, I'm super fortunate to to work with these fantastic folks. I want to thank Nili and Sheri and Claudia for really taking the lead on this and being fantastic. And thank you to all of you for joining us and participating with us, because we really did want to have dialogue. And I feel like we were able to do that with you because of your choice to participate. So thank you. Nili, Sheri, Claudia, anything else?
I think there's just a link to the survey in the chat that Becky put up. And so if people can go ahead and fill that out, I'm sure that it would be very helpful for us for future sessions as well.
Yeah, so we can help.
I would assume that when we share the slides for posterity, we'll be able to include that information from the Google Doc so that anybody here will have access to that. So thanks, everyone. It's been fun. I learned a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all. Thank you, Grace.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nili. Thank you, Sheri. Thank you, Claudia. And thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, everybody, today for attending, and make sure you've had some time to fill out the survey. And then in a few minutes, I'm going to go ahead and close out this room.